Muscular Millionaire left her and their child for her best friend. Years later, he knocked on her door, but success changes people, and Matthew started changing in ways that made Alicia's stomach twist with worry. Have you ever loved someone's potential more than their reality? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The knock on her door came at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night in Houston, and Alicia knew before she opened it that her carefully rebuilt world was about to collapse. Standing there, soaked from the rain and nothing like the powerful Miami millionaire she remembered, was Matthew, the man who had chosen her best friend over her 9 years ago. But he wasn't there about Camille or even about them. The first words out of his mouth were about their son. He's in danger, and I'm the only one who can save him. What do you do when the man who destroyed you becomes the only hope for your child's survival? Have you ever had to choose between your pride and your child's safety? Have you ever faced the person who betrayed you when you were most vulnerable? Tonight, we're diving into a story about betrayal, redemption, and the lengths a mother will go to protect what matters most. Stay with me as we uncover how one rainy night in Houston changed 3 lives forever. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about forgiveness and second chances. But to understand why that knock terrified her so much, we need to go back to where it all began. It started in Atlanta, back when Matthew's hands were still soft from never doing real work, and his smile could make Alicia forget she'd promised herself she'd never fall for a pretty boy with big plans and empty pockets. She was 24, working double shifts at the hospital while studying to become a nurse practitioner. He was 26, fresh out of business school with ideas that sounded like gold but hadn't made him a single dollar yet. Their first date happened by accident. She was grabbing coffee before her night shift when this man in an expensive suit, though she'd later learn it was his only good one, dropped his laptop bag right in front of her. Papers scattered everywhere. Business plans, loan applications, rejection letters from banks. She helped him collect the mess, and when their hands touched reaching for the same document, something electric shot between them. "You're trying to start a construction company," she said, reading over his shoulder without meaning to. "You think that's crazy?" Matthew asked, and for the first time since she'd known men, she heard actual vulnerability in a guy's voice. "I think it takes guts," she replied, and watched his whole face light up like she'd given him something precious. That night, instead of going home after a shift, she found herself in his beat-up Honda Civic, driving around Atlanta while he showed her empty lots and talked about the buildings he wanted to create. His passion was infectious, his dreams so big they seemed to fill up all the space between them. When he finally kissed her outside her apartment building at sunrise, she tasted possibility on his lips. The Atlanta skyline glowed amber through the windows of her modest apartment, casting golden shadows across their intertwined bodies as he traced promises on her skin with his fingertips. They made love like they were trying to build something permanent with their bodies, his hands mapping her curves while he whispered about the future they'd create together. "I'm going to buy you a house with a view," he murmured against her neck, his body moving inside hers with desperate intensity. "You won't have to work these crazy hours forever." She believed him. God help her. She believed every word that fell from his mouth while he moved above her, their sweat mixing in the humid Atlanta air. The way he looked at her during those intimate moments, like she was salvation and temptation rolled into one, made her think she'd finally found a man who saw her worth. For 6 months, their relationship burned hot and bright. She'd come home from 12-hour shifts to find him in her kitchen, cooking dinner with ingredients he'd somehow afforded, candles lit, music playing. They'd eat, talk about their days, and then he'd carry her to bed where they'd lose themselves in each other until her alarm went off the next morning. Matthew's business slowly started taking shape. He landed his first small contract, then another. Alicia watched him transform from a dreamer into someone who walked a little taller, talked a little louder, dressed a little better. She was proud of him, proud to be the woman supporting his rise. Have you ever loved someone's potential more than their reality? Tell me in the comments about a time you believed in someone who wasn't ready to believe in themselves. But success changes people, and Matthew started changing in ways that made Alicia's stomach twist with worry. As he dressed for another business meeting, she noticed the expensive cologne, a scent she'd never bought him. When she asked about it, his pause lasted 1 second too long. "Client meeting," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Gotta look the part." That pause would haunt her for months, because what she didn't know was that Matthew's first lie wasn't about cologne. The last one would cost her everything she thought they were building together. Chapter 2. Cracks in Paradise, 600 words. The first lie was about cologne. The last one would cost her everything she thought they were building together. Matthew's construction business exploded faster than either of them expected. One day, he was begging banks for loans. The next, he was driving a BMW and talking about expanding to Miami. Alicia should have been celebrating, but something felt wrong. The man who used to tell her about every phone call, every meeting, every small victory, suddenly became guarded about his days. "How was work?" she'd ask when he came home later and later each night. "Good," he'd say, already heading for the shower. "Busy." That was it. No stories, no excitement, no sharing her in the victories she'd helped make possible. Just busy and the sound of running water washing away whatever he didn't want to talk about. The pregnancy test changed everything, or at least Alicia thought it would. The positive pregnancy test lay on their bathroom counter like a tiny beacon of hope, but when she looked in the mirror, she saw fear in her own eyes for the first time. Not fear of being a mother, but fear of Matthew's reaction. When had she started walking on eggshells around the man she loved? She found him in the living room, going through contracts with his phone pressed to his ear. Business calls that used to happen during business hours now invaded their evenings, their weekends, their bed. She waited for him to hang up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Matthew," she said, holding the test behind her back like a surprise gift. "We need to talk." He looked up, irritation flashing across his face before he caught himself. "Can it wait?" "This deal with the Miami investors." "I'm pregnant." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She watched his face cycle through emotions she couldn't read. Surprise, panic, something that might have been calculation. Finally, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Wow. That's amazing, baby." He pulled her into his arms, but his embrace felt mechanical, like he was going through motions. "We should celebrate." They made love that night, but it felt different. Desperate on her part, distracted on his. She tried to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of their bodies, the way he used to worship every inch of her skin, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his mind was somewhere else entirely. Even when he moved inside her, whispering sweet words about their future, she sensed he was performing rather than feeling. "Are you happy about the baby?" she asked afterward, lying in his arms in the dark. "Of course," he said quickly. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you looked terrified when I told you," she thought but didn't say. "Because you've been pulling away for weeks. Because something is wrong, and I'm too scared to push for the truth." The restaurant receipt fell from his jacket pocket 3 days later while she was doing laundry. Dinner for two at Bones, the same upscale steakhouse where they'd had their first real date, where he'd promised to take her back when he could afford to treat her right. She stared at the receipt, her pregnant belly cramping with anxiety. The date was from last Tuesday, the night he'd told her he was working late on proposals. The night she'd eaten leftover pizza alone and fallen asleep watching TV, waiting for him to come home. 2 dinners, 2 drinks. The kind of expensive meal Matthew used to say was a waste of money back when they were building their dreams together instead of living separate lives. When was the last time someone's simple touch left you breathless? Share your story in the comments about relationships that couldn't survive one person's growth. Her hand shook as she held the receipt. Part of her wanted to confront him immediately, but a bigger part was terrified of what he might say. Because deep down, she was starting to suspect that Matthew's success hadn't just changed his bank account. It had changed what he wanted, and maybe she was no longer part of that vision. The front door opened, and she heard his keys hit the table. "Alicia, you home?" She stuffed the receipt in her pocket and took a deep breath. Some conversations couldn't be avoided forever, even when you weren't ready for the answers. Camille had been her sister in everything but blood, until the night Alicia discovered some secrets cut deeper than family ties. Camille Williams was the kind of beautiful that made other women check their makeup when she walked into a room. They'd been best friends since college, the inseparable duo who finished each other's sentences and shared everything from clothes to secrets to dreams about the future. When Alicia started dating Matthew, Camille was the first person she called, squealing like a teenager about this amazing man she'd met. "Girl, bring him around," Camille had laughed over the phone. "I need to see if he's good enough for my sister." That should have been Alicia's first warning. The way Camille said, "my sister," like she owned something. The way her eyes lingered on Matthew just a beat too long when Alicia finally introduced them. The way she found excuses to touch his arm when she talked, laugh just a little too hard at his jokes, show up whenever Alicia mentioned they had plans. "She's just being friendly," Matthew said when Alicia mentioned feeling uncomfortable about Camille's behavior. "You're overthinking it." But women know things men don't understand. Women recognize the signs when another woman is hunting. As Matthew's business grew, so did Camille's interest in the details of his life. She knew his schedule better than Alicia did sometimes, always asking about his meetings, his deals, his plans to expand to Miami. She called during dinner, text him directly instead of going through Alicia, offer to help with business functions that Alicia was too tired to attend because of the pregnancy. "You should rest," Camille would say, her manicured hand rubbing Alicia's growing belly with fake concern. "I can go with Matthew to that investor dinner. Someone should be there to support him." Camille sat across from her in the coffee shop they'd claimed as theirs since college. But today the familiar booth felt like enemy territory, every smile a potential weapon. They'd met here every Wednesday for 3 years, but now Alicia studied her best friend's face like she was looking at a stranger. "You seem stressed," Camille said, stirring sugar into her latte with perfectly painted nails. "The pregnancy hormones must be crazy right now." "I found a receipt," Alicia said without preamble. "From Bones. Tuesday night." Camille's spoon clinked against her cup. "Oh, just oh. Not surprise, not confusion, not what receipt. Just a flat acknowledgement of someone who'd been caught." "You knew," Alicia said, her voice deadly quiet. "You knew he was lying to me about working late." "Alicia, how long?" The words came out sharper than broken glass. "How long have you known he's cheating on me?" Camille's composure cracked just enough to show the calculating woman underneath. "You don't understand the pressure he's under. Building a business, becoming successful, having a baby on the way. Don't you dare defend him to me." Alicia's hand moved protectively to her belly. "And don't you dare blame my pregnancy for his lies. I'm just saying that men like Matthew, men with ambition, they need different things as they grow. Maybe you two just want different futures now." The casual cruelty of it took Alicia's breath away. This was her best friend, the woman who'd held her hair back when she was sick, who'd helped her move into every apartment, who'd promised to be her maid of honor someday. And she was sitting here calmly explaining why Alicia deserved to be betrayed. Different things like what? Alicia asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Camille smiled, and for the first time, Alicia saw the venom that had always been hidden behind the friendship. Like a woman who fits the life he's building. Someone who looks right at business dinners, who understands his world. When Camille accidentally used Matthew's pet name for Alicia's body, calling her beautiful girl in the exact tone Matthew used during their most intimate moments, the coffee cup slipped from Alicia's hands, shattering on the floor like her trust. Have you ever had a friend who knew too much about your relationship? When friendship crosses the line into interference, how do you handle it? Because that pet name wasn't something Matthew shared casually. It was whispered against skin, breathed into ears during moments when guards were down and hearts were open. And the only way Camille could know exactly how he said it was if she'd heard it herself. She went to surprise the man she loved and found him creating a different kind of memory with the woman she trusted most. The rain hammered Atlanta that Friday night, the kind of storm that makes you want to stay inside with someone you love. Alicia had spent the afternoon cooking Matthew's favorite meal, jerk chicken with rice and plantains, the recipe his grandmother had taught her, during one of their early dates. She wanted to surprise him at his new office, to remind him of what they had before success started building walls between them. 7 months pregnant and carrying a thermos of warm food, she drove through the storm to the gleaming office building that represented everything Matthew had worked for. She should have called first, but surprises used to be their thing, back when they were building dreams together instead of living separate lives. The parking garage was mostly empty, just a few cars including Matthew's BMW and a red Mercedes she didn't recognize. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal, her heart beating fast with excitement about seeing his face when she walked through the door. The office lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the leather furniture where she found them. Not just physically entangled, but comfortable in their betrayal, like it had been happening for months. Matthew's shirt was unbuttoned, Camille's dress pushed up around her waist, their mouths locked together with the kind of desperate hunger that used to be reserved for Alicia. They didn't notice her at first, too lost in each other to sense they had an audience. Alicia stood frozen in the doorway, one hand on her pregnant belly, the other gripping the thermos of food that suddenly felt like the most pathetic thing in the world. It was Camille who saw her first. Instead of shame or panic, something almost like satisfaction crossed her face before she gasped and pushed Matthew away. "Oh my God, Alicia!" Matthew spun around, his face cycling through shock, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief. Like he'd been waiting for this moment, for the decision to be taken out of his hands. "Baby, let me explain," he started, but Alicia held up her hand to stop him. "How long?" Her voice sounded surprisingly calm, though her whole body was shaking. Matthew ran his hands through his hair, the same gesture he made when he was stressed about business deals. Except this wasn't business. This was the complete destruction of everything she believed about their life together. "Alicia, please." "Complicated?" The word exploded out of her. "I'm 7 months pregnant with your child, and you call cheating with my best friend complicated?" "The baby changes everything," Camille said, like she was being helpful. "Matthew needs someone who can grow with him, who fits the life he's building. You have to see that." The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. This woman had sat in Alicia's living room just days ago, rubbing her belly and asking about baby names, all while sleeping with the father. What's worse, the betrayal itself, or realizing it's been happening right under your nose? Share your thoughts on trust and intuition. As she stood in that doorway, 6 months pregnant and watching her world collapse, Alicia made a decision that would define the next decade. She wouldn't beg, wouldn't fight, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I hope you're both very happy," she said quietly, setting the thermos of food on the reception desk. "And I hope you never have to explain to a child why their father chose someone else over their family." She walked away with her head high and her heart shattered, knowing that neither of them would follow her. Some betrayals are so complete they destroy the very foundation of who you thought you were. But sometimes that destruction is the first step toward becoming someone stronger than you ever imagined possible. She packed a life into 2 suitcases and drove toward a city where nobody knew her name or her shame. The decision came to her in the hospital parking lot 3 days after catching Matthew and Camille together. She'd been sitting in her car after a prenatal appointment, staring at the ultrasound photo of her son, because the baby was a boy and she was going to raise him alone, when her phone rang for the 15th time that day. Matthew's name lit up the screen. She'd been ignoring his calls since Friday night, letting his voicemails pile up with apologies she didn't want to hear and explanations she didn't need. But this time she answered. "Alicia, thank God. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, there is. The baby, us, everything. I made a mistake." "A mistake." She laughed, and the sound was bitter even to her own ears. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. What you did was make a choice. Every day, for 3 months, you chose her over me. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple." She looked down at the ultrasound photo, at the tiny face that looked just like Matthew's baby pictures. "I'm leaving Atlanta." The silence stretched between them. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone cold in a way she'd never heard before. You can't just disappear with my child. Watch me." Houston's humidity wrapped around her like a second skin as she carried her newborn son into their first apartment. Small, safe, and most importantly, hers. She'd chosen Houston because it was big enough to disappear in, far enough from Atlanta to start fresh, and different enough that everything wouldn't remind her of a life she'd left behind. Marcus David Johnson, she'd given him her maiden name instead of Matthews, was born on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 weeks after she'd arrived in Texas. Labor was long and lonely, with only a nurse holding her hand when she needed to squeeze something during contractions. She wanted to call her mother, but that would mean explanations she wasn't ready to give. The apartment was a one-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days, but the neighbors were friendly and nobody asked too many questions about the pregnant woman who'd moved in with just 2 suitcases and a fierce determination to make it work. She found a job at Memorial Hermann Hospital, working night shifts in the emergency room while Marcus slept, and day shifts at a clinic when she could get childcare. Money was tight, but it was honest money. Money she earned with her own hands, her own skills, her own strength. There was dignity in struggle when it was your choice, when you weren't dependent on anyone else's version of love or loyalty. The hardest part wasn't the long hours or the tiny apartment or even the loneliness. The hardest part was the way Marcus would sometimes make expressions that looked exactly like his father, or the way she'd catch herself wanting to call Matthew when the baby hit milestones, his first smile, his first word, his first steps. She kept her old phone number for months, secretly hoping Matthew would call, would fight for them, would prove that what they'd had was worth more than whatever he'd found with Camille. But the phone stayed silent, and eventually, she changed the number and threw away the SIM card that had connected her to her old life. Have you ever had to completely start over in a new place? What gave you the strength to rebuild when everything fell apart? Dating was impossible, not just because of the time and energy it took to raise Marcus alone, but because trusting anyone felt like standing too close to a fire after you'd been burned. The few men who showed interest couldn't understand why she was so guarded, why she flinched away from promises and kept her heart locked away like something too precious to risk again. The private investigator's business card slipped under her door 3 years later with a note. "He's been looking for you. Should I tell him I found you?" Alicia stared at the card for a long time, then tore into pieces and flushed them down the toilet. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But deep down, in a place she didn't like to acknowledge, she wondered if Matthew ever thought about the son he'd never met. If he ever regretted choosing momentary passion over permanent love. If he ever realized that some mistakes can't be undone, no matter how much success you achieve afterward. She built a fortress around her heart so strong that even she sometimes forgot there was still a woman inside who once knew how to love. 5 years in Houston had changed Alicia in ways she hadn't expected. The scared, pregnant girl who'd fled Atlanta was gone, replaced by a woman who could handle anything life threw at her. She'd earned her nurse practitioner degree while working full-time and raising Marcus alone. She owned her struggles now, wore her independence like armor that nobody could dent. But armor has a cost, and hers was the inability to let anyone close enough to matter. "Mama, why don't you have a boyfriend like Tyler's mom?" Marcus asked one evening while she helped him with homework. He was 6 now, all curiosity and questions that cut straight to the heart of things adults try to avoid. "Because Mama's too busy taking care of you," she said, which was only half the truth. The whole truth was that she tried dating. There was David, the teacher who brought flowers and spoke softly and made her laugh over dinner dates that felt forced. There was Carlos, the firefighter who was patient with Marcus and strong enough to fix things around her apartment. There was Jerome, the lawyer who understood her ambition and could match her intellectually. All good men, all wrong for reasons she couldn't explain to them or herself. The playground in their Houston neighborhood buzzed with families, complete units that highlighted what she and Marcus were missing, but she'd learned to find strength in their incomplete perfection. She watched other mothers chat while their kids played, but she never quite fit into their conversations about husband troubles or date nights or the luxury of having someone else share the load. "You're intimidating," her coworker Keisha told her over lunch one day. These men can tell you don't need them, and that scares them. Good, Alicia replied, though something inside her ached at the words. I don't want a man I don't need. I want one I choose. But choosing meant risking, and risk meant the possibility of being wrong again. Risk meant letting someone see the vulnerable parts of herself she'd spent years learning to protect. The closest she'd come to letting someone in was with David, the elementary school teacher who'd coached Marcus's soccer team. He was everything Matthew wasn't: steady, reliable, present. He showed up when he said he would, called when he promised to call, treated Marcus like he mattered. Their first and only attempt at intimacy happened on a Saturday night when Marcus was sleeping over at a friend's house. David had cooked dinner, lit candles, created the kind of romantic atmosphere that should have made her feel treasured. When he kissed her, she responded because she wanted to want him. When he touched her, she tried to lose herself in the sensation. But when he whispered her name against her skin, all she could hear was Matthew's voice from 9 years ago. When his hands moved across her body, she remembered different hands, different promises, different lies. She froze up completely, pushing him away with tears she couldn't explain. I'm sorry, she whispered, pulling her clothes back together while he sat there confused and concerned. I can't. I'm not ready. For what? David asked gently. Making love, or trusting someone enough to let them care about you? The question haunted her for weeks after they stopped seeing each other. Because he was right. She wasn't afraid of sex or physical intimacy. She was terrified of emotional connection, of giving someone the power to devastate her again. How long is too long to let past hurt control your present? When someone breaks your trust completely, can you ever really love again? Marcus looked up from his homework with Matthew's exact eyes and asked the question she'd been dreading. Mom, why don't I have a dad like the other kids? The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, but she wasn't prepared for the innocent pain in her son's voice, the way he said it like he thought something was wrong with him. You do have a dad, baby, she said carefully. He lives far away. Why doesn't he visit? Did I do something wrong? Her heart shattered and reformed in the space of a heartbeat. No, Marcus, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people they love, and your dad made some bad choices before you were born. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her laptop and typed Matthew's name into the search engine for the first time in 9 years. What she found made her stomach drop. Matthew Torres, CEO of Torres Construction, Miami's fastest-growing development company. Net worth estimated at $50 million. And in every photo, every article, every mention of his success, there was no mention of a wife, children, or family. He'd built an empire, but apparently, he'd built it alone. For 8 years, she wrote him letters she never mailed, until the day she decided one deserved to reach him. The shoebox under her bed overflowed with unsent letters. 8 years of conversations with a ghost, each one a step toward healing she hadn't realized she was taking. Some were angry, filled with curses and accusations. Others were sad, full of longing for what they'd lost. A few were updates about Marcus, descriptions of first steps, and first words that Matthew would never witness. She'd started writing them during those first lonely months in Houston, when the silence in her apartment felt too heavy to bear. Dear Matthew, she'd begin, then pour her heart onto paper, all the things she wanted to say, needed to say, but couldn't risk actually sending. The letters evolved as she did. The early ones were raw wounds on paper. You chose her over your own child. How do you sleep at night, knowing you have a son you've never held? Later ones showed her growth, her strength. Marcus took his first steps today. He's walking toward a future you'll never be part of, and maybe that's for the best. The most recent ones were different. Calmer, almost forgiving. I used to hate you for leaving. Now I realize you did us a favor. Marcus is growing up knowing his worth isn't tied to someone else's ability to stay. But tonight, sitting at her kitchen table while Marcus slept, she wrote a different kind of letter. One that wasn't about the past, or her feelings, or even her anger. This one was about their son, and the questions she couldn't answer anymore. Matthew, our son, is 8 years old. His name is Marcus David Johnson, and he's the best person I've ever known. He has your eyes, your stubborn streak, and your way of charming everyone he meets. He also has questions I can't answer. He wants to know why he doesn't have a father like other kids. He wants to know if it's his fault that you're not here. He wants to know if you even know he exists. I'm not asking you to be part of our lives. I'm asking you to let me tell him the truth, that you know about him, that your absence is your choice, not his failure. He deserves to know he wasn't abandoned by someone who didn't know he mattered. If you want to meet him, we can arrange something. If you don't, I need you to tell me, so I can help him understand. But this limbo, where he doesn't know if his father cares whether he's alive or dead, that has to end. He's a good kid, Matthew. The kind of son any man would be proud to claim. Your loss is his gain, but he doesn't understand it yet. Alicia. She stared at the letter for an hour, reading and rereading every word. This wasn't like the others. This one had the power to change everything, or destroy the careful peace she'd built around their life. Reading old letters triggered memories of their physical connection. The way Matthew's hands used to trace her spine while he told her about his dreams. How his voice would drop to a whisper when he made love to her like she was something precious. Her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. The electricity between them, the way they used to fit together perfectly, the dangerous chemistry that made her forget everything else existed. Even now, thinking about him made her skin warm in ways she didn't want to acknowledge. Her body's betrayal in remembering his touch was almost worse than the emotional scars he'd left behind. Have you ever written letters you never sent? Sometimes we need to say things, even if the other person never hears them. What would you write? She'd been celibate for 8 years, not by choice, but by inability to trust anyone enough to be that vulnerable again. Every time a man got close, every time someone tried to touch her with genuine care, Matthew's ghost stood between them like a wall she couldn't climb. At 3 a.m., she made the decision that would change all their lives. She addressed an envelope, found a stamp, and walked to the mailbox in her pajamas. The letter disappeared into the slot with a soft thud that sounded like a door closing on one chapter of their lives and opening another. His response came within hours of her email. Not the anger or excuses she expected, but 4 words that stopped her heart. Marcus is in danger. The danger she'd spent 8 years protecting Marcus from wasn't Matthew. It was the enemies Matthew had made while building his empire. Alicia stared at her phone screen, reading Matthew's message over and over until the words blurred together. Marcus is in danger. For words that turned her carefully controlled world upside down and made every protective instinct she developed as a single mother roar to life. Her hands shook as she typed back. What kind of danger? What are you talking about? The response came immediately. I'm driving to Houston now. Don't let Marcus out of your sight. Don't go anywhere alone. I'll explain everything when I get there. Don't you dare show up at my house after 9 years and start giving me orders. Alicia, please. This isn't about us. It's about people who want to hurt me through my family. And whether you like it or not, you and Marcus are my family. The word family hit her like a slap. After 9 years of silence, now he wanted to claim them? Now, when there was danger involved. She looked down the hall toward Marcus's bedroom, where her son slept peacefully, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down by a father he'd never met. The same protective fury that had driven her to leave Atlanta now demanded answers. You have 1 hour to explain before I call the police. I'll be there in 6 hours. Keep the doors locked. The longest night of her life crawled by with agonizing slowness. She checked on Marcus every 30 minutes, double-checked all the locks, closed all the curtains. Every car that passed on the street made her heart race. Every sound made her grab the baseball bat she kept by her bed, not because of break-ins, but because single mothers in Houston learned to be prepared for anything. At exactly 6 a.m., the knock came. She looked through the peephole and saw a man who was both completely familiar and utterly changed. Matthew Torres was bigger now, more muscled, with expensive clothes and the kind of confidence that came from years of success. But his eyes, those were the same eyes that had once looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted. You have exactly 1 hour, she said, opening the door just wide enough for him to enter. Start talking. The photographs Matthew spread across her kitchen table showed Marcus walking to school, playing at the park, sleeping in his bed, intimate moments captured by strangers with dark intentions. Alicia felt sick looking at them, violated in a way that made her want to grab Marcus and run somewhere even more remote than Houston. "Who are these people?" she demanded, her voice deadly quiet. "Viktor Kozlov. Russian mob connections, Miami-based operation." Matthew's hands clenched into fists as he talked. "I had some dealings with his construction company 3 years ago. Money laundering through legitimate building projects. I didn't know what I was getting into until it was too late. And you got out." "I tried to. That's when things got complicated." Matthew ran his hands through his hair. The same gesture he'd made when stressed about business deals, except now the stakes were life and death. "I have evidence of their operations. Enough to put Kozlov and his associates away for decades. So turn it over to the FBI and be done with it." "It's not that simple." Matthew met her eyes, and she saw genuine fear there. "Kozlov knows about Marcus. Knows I have a son. He's using that as leverage to keep me quiet." The room went cold. "How does he know about Marcus?" "I've kept us completely separate from your life." "I don't know. Maybe he had me investigated, found records, trace connections. These people have resources, Alicia. They found you when I couldn't. Would you work with someone who betrayed you if your child's life depended on it? How do you separate past hurt from present necessity?" She studied Matthew's face, looking for signs of deception, for the tells she'd learned to recognize 9 years ago. But all she saw was desperation, fear, and something that looked like genuine regret. "What do they want?" "For me to destroy the evidence and keep my mouth shut. In exchange, they leave my family alone." "We're not your family," she said automatically, but the words felt hollow even to her. "You are to them, and that makes you targets." As they planned Marcus's protection, Alicia realized the hardest truth of all. Despite everything Matthew had done, she still knew his body language better than anyone, and right now, he was lying about something crucial. The question was whether the lies were meant to protect her or destroy her. They had to become a team to save their son, but working together meant confronting everything they'd left unfinished. The safe house Matthew arranged wasn't what Alicia expected. Instead of some gritty hideout, it was a luxury apartment in downtown Houston with floor-to-ceiling windows, granite countertops, and furniture that cost more than she made in 6 months. It felt like a prison made of marble and money. "This is temporary," Matthew said, setting down their bags while Marcus explored the space with wide-eyed wonder. "Just until I can neutralize the threat." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Alicia watched their son touch everything with the careful reverence of a kid who'd never been around such expensive things. "Turn yourself into the FBI and hope they protect us?" Something like that. But Matthew's jaw was tight in a way that meant he wasn't telling her the whole truth. The safe house felt like a pressure cooker. Luxury amenities couldn't mask the tension between them, or the way Marcus kept looking between his parents like he was solving a puzzle. For 8 years, it had been just him and Alicia. Now suddenly, there was this man who claimed to be his father, who looked like him, who moved through the world with the kind of confidence Marcus had never seen up close. "Are you really my dad?" Marcus asked during dinner, his voice small and uncertain. Matthew's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For a moment, he looked exactly like the young man Alicia had fallen in love with. Vulnerable, hopeful, scared of saying the wrong thing. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm your father. Why didn't you ever come see me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alicia waited to see how Matthew would handle it, whether he'd blame her for keeping them apart or take responsibility for his own choices. "Because I made some really bad decisions when you were born," Matthew said, his voice steady. "I hurt your mom badly, and I thought staying away was better than making things worse. I was wrong about that." Marcus considered this with the serious expression he wore when working through difficult problems. "Mom says you live in Miami." "I do. Is it nice there?" "It's okay. But Houston is better because you're here." The simple honesty of it made Alicia's chest tight. This was the Matthew she'd fallen in love with, the one who could say exactly the right thing without trying to impress anyone. They fell into an uneasy routine over the next few days. Matthew worked his phone constantly, making calls about the situation in hushed tones. Alicia tried to maintain some normalcy for Marcus, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, keeping his schedule as regular as possible under the circumstances. But proximity was dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with Russian mobsters. She'd forgotten how Matthew moved through space, confident but not arrogant, aware of his effect on people but not obviously using it. She'd forgotten the way he listened when she talked, like her words mattered more than whatever else was happening around them. She'd forgotten how his laugh could fill a room and make everyone else want to join in. Most dangerously, she'd forgotten how her body responded to his presence without her permission. Can you co-parent effectively with someone who broke your heart? How do you put your child first when your own emotions are screaming? The moment of weakness came on the third night, when they were cleaning up dinner while Marcus watched cartoons in the living room. Matthew was drying dishes while she washed, their movements synchronized like they'd been doing this dance for years instead of days. "I kept pictures," he said quietly, not looking at her, "of you, from before everything went wrong." She didn't respond, didn't trust herself to speak. "I know I have no right to miss you," he continued, "but I did. Every day for 9 years, I missed you." The plate slipped from her hands, splashing soapy water everywhere. As they both reached for paper towels, their hands collided, fingers interlocking for just a moment before she pulled away. But that moment was enough. The electricity between them was still there, still dangerous, still capable of making her forget every lesson she'd learned about protecting her heart. When Marcus fell asleep between them on the couch, his small hand in each of theirs, Alicia looked at Matthew and saw something that terrified her more than any threat. The man she'd fallen in love with was still there, waiting beneath all the success and pain and years of separation. Proximity was supposed to be about protection, but some fires never really die. They just wait for the right conditions to reignite. The storm outside trapped them indoors, rain lashing against windows like nature's reminder that some forces are beyond human control, including the electricity crackling between them. Marcus had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a day of being cooped up inside, leaving Alicia and Matthew alone for the first time since arriving at the safe house. "I should check the security cameras," Matthew said, but he didn't move from his spot on the couch across from her. "I should catch up on work emails," Alicia replied, but her laptop remained closed on the coffee table. Instead, they sat in the soft glow of table lamps, the silence heavy with 9 years of unspoken words, unresolved feelings, and the kind of awareness that made every accidental glance feel like a touch. "You've done an amazing job with him," Matthew said finally, nodding toward the hallway where Marcus slept. "He's smart, kind, confident. Everything I hoped he'd be. He's everything you'll never be to him," she said, the words sharper than she'd intended. Matthew winced but didn't argue. I know I don't deserve to be part of his life, or yours. But Alicia, watching you two together, seeing the life you built, I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She'd expected excuses, justifications, attempts to minimize his abandonment. She hadn't expected genuine admiration for her strength. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what? Don't look at me like that. Don't say things that make me remember why I loved you." The admission hung between them like a confession. Matthew's eyes darkened, his entire body going still in the way of a predator that spotted its prey. "Do you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Remember why you loved me?" She should have lied, should have built another wall, created more distance, protected the peace she'd fought so hard to achieve. Instead, she found herself standing up, walking to the window, staring out at the rain while her heart hammered against her ribs. "I remember everything," she said to the glass. "I remember how you used to trace my spine while telling me about your dreams. I remember the way your voice would change when you were inside me, like I was something sacred. I remember believing that what we had was forever." She felt him move behind her, felt his heat against her back without him actually touching her. The mirror image of them in the window showed two people struggling not to fall back into a pattern that had destroyed them once before. "I remember too," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "I remember how you'd arch your back when I kissed your neck. How you'd whisper my name like a prayer. How you made me feel like I could conquer the world as long as you were beside me. Is it possible to still be attracted to someone who hurt you deeply? How do you handle those conflicted feelings when they resurface? She turned around, which was a mistake because it put them face to face, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to remember exactly how his mouth had felt against hers. This is insane, she breathed. Completely, he agreed, but neither of them stepped back. The kiss happened slowly, like they were both fighting it even as they gave in. His hands framed her face with the reverence of someone touching something precious and fragile. Her fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed at her to push him away. They kissed like they were drowning, and each other was air, desperate, consuming, full of 9 years of longing they tried to bury. His mouth tasted like regret and possibility, like coming home and falling off a cliff at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back over them like cold water. "We can't," she said, stepping back until she hit the window. "I know, Marcus. I know." But the damage was done. The carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart had cracks now, and Matthew Torres had always been excellent at finding weaknesses and exploiting them for his own purposes. Marcus walked into the kitchen the morning after their kiss and asked innocently, "Are you and Mom going to be together now, Dad?" Both parents froze, realizing their son had been hoping for this reunion all along. Marcus walked into the kitchen the morning after their kiss and asked innocently, "Are you and Mom going to be together now, Dad?" Both parents froze, realizing their son had been hoping for this reunion all along. The coffee cup slipped from Alicia's hands, hitting the counter with a sharp crack that matched the sound her heart made. 8-year-old Marcus stood in his pajamas, hair sticking up from sleep, looking between his parents with the hopeful expression of a child who believed in happy endings. "Why would you ask that, baby?" Alicia managed, her voice careful and controlled. "Because you're both here," Marcus said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "And Dad's taking care of us. And last night, you were both smiling when you thought I wasn't looking." Matthew cleared his throat, his face cycling through emotions Alicia couldn't read. "Marcus, your mom and I are just working together to keep you safe. That's what parents do." But Tyler's parents got back together after they were apart for a while. Marcus continued, climbing onto his chair at the breakfast table. His dad moved back in, and now they're all happy again. Maybe that could happen with us too. The innocent hope in his voice was like a knife twisting in Alicia's chest. She'd spent 8 years protecting Marcus from the truth about his father, letting him believe that sometimes daddies just lived far away. She'd never considered that he might be building fantasies about reunion, about becoming a complete family. "It's not that simple, baby," she said, moving to fix his cereal with hands that weren't quite steady. "Sometimes when grown-ups have been apart for a long time, they're different people than they used to be. But you still like each other," Marcus observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. "I can tell. You look at Dad the way you look at chocolate cake, like you want it but think you shouldn't have it." Matthew choked on his coffee, and despite everything, Alicia felt her lips twitch with the urge to smile. Trust Marcus to cut through adult complications with 8-year-old logic. "Where did you learn to be so smart?" she asked, ruffling his hair. "From you," Marcus said seriously. "You always tell me to pay attention to what people do, not just what they say. And Dad keeps looking at you like you're the most important person in the room." The observation hit too close to home. Alicia glanced at Matthew, who was studying his coffee cup like it held the answers to life's mysteries. They've been trying so hard to keep their complicated feelings away from Marcus, but children see everything adults think they're hiding. "Marcus," Matthew said carefully, "your mom and I care about each other because we both love you. But that doesn't mean we're going to live together like a regular family." "Why not?" The question was simple, devastating. "Because your father chose another woman over us. Because trust, once broken, doesn't just magically repair itself. Because some mistakes change everything forever. Because sometimes people hurt each other in ways that can't be fixed," Alicia said instead. "Even when they're sorry, even when they want things to be different." Marcus considered this with the serious expression he wore when working through math problems. Did Dad hurt you, Mom? The question hung in the air like a live wire. Alicia looked at Matthew, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. How do you explain adult betrayal to a child who still believes in fairness and second chances? Yes, she said quietly. He did. Did you say you're sorry, Dad? Marcus asked, turning to Matthew with the expectation that apologies could fix anything. Many times, Matthew replied. But saying sorry doesn't always make the hurt go away. It does when I say sorry to you, Mom. That's different, baby. When you make mistakes, they're little kid mistakes. Grown-up mistakes are bigger and harder to forgive. Have you ever had to explain complex adult relationships to a child? How do you balance honesty with age-appropriate information? Marcus finished his cereal in thoughtful silence, processing information too heavy for his young shoulders. Finally, he looked up with determination that reminded Alicia exactly of Matthew at that age. Well, I think you should try harder, he said, because families are supposed to stick together, even when things are hard. That's what you always tell me, out of the mouths of babes. Sometimes children understand love better than the adults who complicate it with pride, fear, and the weight of past mistakes. Later that morning, while Marcus played video games, Matthew found Alicia on the balcony staring out at the Houston skyline. He's not wrong, you know, he said quietly, about families sticking together when things are hard. Don't, she warned. Don't use our son's innocence to manipulate me into forgetting what you did. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to figure out if there's any part of you that thinks we might deserve a second chance. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to figure out if there's any part of you that thinks we might deserve a second chance. The honest vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. This was the Matthew she'd fallen in love with, the one who could admit uncertainty, who could ask for what he needed without demanding it. But wanting something and being wise enough to pursue it were two different things entirely. The last person Alicia expected to call was Camille, until she realized her former best friend might be the key to ending the nightmare that had consumed their lives. The phone rang at 2 a.m., jolting Alicia awake from restless sleep. Matthew's name on the caller ID made her stomach clench with fear. Middle of the night calls never brought good news. They found us, Matthew said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled panic. Victor's people traced the safe house. We have maybe an hour before they arrive. Alicia was already moving, shaking Marcus awake, throwing essentials into a bag while her mind raced through options. Where do we go? I'm working on it. But Alicia, there's something else. Something I should have told you from the beginning. She paused in her packing, noting the tone that meant he was about to drop another bomb on her carefully controlled world. What now? Camille contacted me 6 months ago. She has information about Victor's operation that could help us. The name hit her like a slap. You've been talking to Camille? For 6 months. It's not what you think. It never is with you. She resumed packing with violent efficiency, muscle memory taking over while her emotions threatened to spiral. Let me guess. She's been feeding you information, playing both sides, and you thought you could handle it without telling me. She reached out because she was in danger too. Victor approached her, tried to use her connection to me as leverage. When she refused to help him find us, they threatened her. Despite everything Camille had done, despite the betrayal that still burned like acid in her memory, Alicia felt a flicker of concern. They'd been friends for too many years, shared too much history, for those feelings to completely disappear. Is she okay? She's scared, and she wants to help end this. Marcus appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, looking small and confused in his pajamas. Mom? What's happening? We're going on another adventure, baby, Alicia said, forcing her voice to stay calm. Remember how we talked about being brave? 20 minutes later, they were in Matthew's car, speeding through empty Houston streets toward a destination he wouldn't name. Marcus fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the constant upheaval of the past week. Where are we going? Alicia asked. A place where we can meet Camille safely. She has evidence that could put Victor away permanently, but she needs protection to turn it over. And you trust her? Matthew was quiet for a long moment. I trust her desperation. People in fear make reliable allies, even when they've been enemies. The warehouse district looked like something from a crime movie. Empty buildings, shadows that could hide anything, the kind of place where bad things happen to good people. Matthew parked beside a building that looked abandoned, but Alicia noticed the expensive sedan already waiting in the darkness. "Stay in the car with Marcus," Matthew said. "Absolutely not. If I'm trusting you with our lives, I'm not doing it blindly." They stared at each other for a moment, the weight of 9 years of separation and mistrust hanging between them. Finally, Matthew nodded. "Wake Marcus gently. We stay together." The woman waiting inside looked nothing like the confident, predatory Camille who had stolen Alicia's life 9 years ago. This Camille was thin, nervous, jumping at every sound. Success and money hadn't protected her from the consequences of playing dangerous games. "Alicia." Camille's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. For everything. But especially for dragging you into this mess." "You didn't drag me into anything," Alicia replied coldly. "Your choices 9 years ago set all of this in motion." "I know, and I've regretted it every day since." When enemies become allies out of necessity, can old wounds ever truly heal? Sometimes survival makes strange partnerships possible. Marcus stirred in Alicia's arms, blinking awake to find himself in a strange place, surrounded by adults whose tension he could feel even in his sleepy state. "Who's that lady, Mom?" he whispered. "Someone who knew your dad and me a long time ago," Alicia said carefully. Camille's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the boy. "He looks just like Matthew did as a child." "He's beautiful, Alicia." "Don't," Alicia warned. "Don't pretend you care about him now." "But I do. More than you know." "Do you want to know why I really called Matthew 6 months ago?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Part of Alicia wanted to refuse, to maintain the simple narrative where Camille was purely selfish and evil. But life was rarely that simple, and sometimes the truth was more complicated than the stories we told ourselves to survive. "Tell me," she said, "because I found out Victor was looking for you and Marcus. And despite everything I've done, despite how much I've hurt you, I couldn't live with myself if something happened to your son because of choices I made." The admission cracked something open in Alicia's chest. Not forgiveness. That would take much more time and proof. But the first tiny recognition that people could change, could grow, could choose differently when faced with the consequences of their past actions. "What evidence do you have?" Matthew asked, bringing them back to the immediate danger. "Financial records, communication logs, proof of money laundering, extortion, and worse." Camille pulled out a flash drive that looked insignificant but contained the power to destroy lives. "Everything we need to bury Victor permanently." "And the cost?" Alicia asked, because nothing in their complicated history had ever come without a price. "We all have to testify. We all have to trust each other long enough to survive this. And we have to hope that destroying Victor's organization doesn't just make room for someone worse to take his place." 3 lives hung in the balance as they walked into Victor's trap, but sometimes the only way out of hell is straight through the fire. The abandoned pier stretched into Galveston Bay like a finger pointing toward an uncertain horizon, fog rolling in from the Gulf to shroud their meeting in appropriate drama. Victor had chosen the location well. Isolated, atmospheric, with plenty of water to dispose of bodies if negotiations went badly. "This is insane," Alicia whispered for the 10th time, checking the wire Matthew wore beneath his jacket. "We should be letting the FBI handle this." "The FBI needs evidence they can use in court," Matthew replied, his voice steady despite the fear she could see in his eyes. "Victor's too careful, too insulated. This is the only way to get him talking on record." Marcus was safely hidden with federal agents 3 miles away, but Alicia felt like she'd left half her heart in that surveillance van. Every motherly instinct screamed at her to run, to grab her son and disappear into witness protection where they'd be safe but never truly free. "Remember," she said, adjusting the nearly invisible camera hidden in her coat button, "we get him talking about the threats, the evidence, his entire operation. Then we get out. And if something goes wrong, Matthew asked. Nothing goes wrong. It can't. But even as she said it, Alicia knew that plans rarely survive contact with reality, especially when that reality involved desperate criminals with nothing left to lose. The footsteps on the pier announced Victor's arrival. Expensive shoes on weather-beaten wood, the sound of a man who'd never had to sneak anywhere in his life. He approached with 2 bodyguards, confident in his power, unaware that every word he spoke was being recorded by multiple agencies. Viktor Kozlov looked nothing like the movie villain Alicia had imagined. Medium height, unremarkable features, the kind of man who could disappear in a crowd, which probably made him more dangerous, not less. Predators who looked like predators were easier to avoid. Mr. Torres, Victor said, his slight Russian accent making even pleasantries sound threatening. And the lovely Alicia. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Let's skip the small talk, Matthew replied. You wanted to meet. Here we are, straight to business. I respect that. Victor smiled, and Alicia felt her skin crawl. The situation is simple. You have evidence that could damage my business interests. I have the ability to make your family disappear permanently. Surely we can reach an accommodation. What kind of accommodation? Alicia asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. You destroy the evidence. All of it. In exchange, I forget you exist. Your son grows up safely, you live your quiet lives, everyone wins. And if we refuse? Matthew's question was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man prepared to die for his family's safety. Victor's smile turned cold. Then you join the many people who have learned that crossing me has permanent consequences. Your son becomes an orphan, raised by the state, wondering why his parents were foolish enough to think they could challenge someone like me. The threat hung in the salt air like poison, but instead of the fear Victor expected, Alicia felt something else entirely. Rage, pure, maternal fury at anyone who would threaten her child. You made one mistake, she said, stepping closer to the man who'd terrorized her family. You threatened my son, and what are you going to do about it? That's when the lights came on. FBI spotlights turning night into day. Agents emerging from hiding positions like avenging angels, the trap finally revealing itself to its intended victim. How far would you go to protect your child? When someone threatens what matters most, ordinary people find extraordinary courage. Victor's face shifted from confidence to confusion to the dawning realization that he'd been outplayed. His hand moved toward his jacket, but stopped when a dozen red laser dots appeared on his chest. Viktor Kozlov, the FBI agent's voice boomed across the water. You're under arrest for extortion, money laundering, and threatening federal witnesses. But even as the cuffs clicked around Victor's wrists, Alicia saw something in his eyes that chilled her blood. Not defeat, but calculation. Men like Victor didn't build empires by accepting defeat gracefully, and she had the terrible feeling that their nightmare was far from over. This isn't finished, Victor said as agents led him away. My organization is bigger than one man. You want a battle, not the war. Matthew pulled her close as they watched the arrest unfold, both of them knowing that Victor's words carried the weight of truth. They'd eliminated one threat, but organizations like his had a way of regenerating like cancer, often coming back stronger and more vicious than before. What happens now? Alicia asked. Now we testify. We help put him away permanently. And then we figure out what comes next for us. The us hung between them like a question neither was quite ready to answer. They'd survived the immediate danger, but the harder challenge lay ahead. Figuring out whether 3 people who'd been torn apart by betrayal could somehow build something resembling a family. 6 months later, the courtroom became the stage where their past would finally be judged, and Alicia discovered that legal justice and emotional healing were 2 very different things. The federal courthouse in Miami felt like a cathedral dedicated to the pursuit of truth, but Alicia knew that truth was often more complicated than legal proceedings could accommodate. She sat in the witness box, her hand on the Bible, looking out at a courtroom packed with reporters, law enforcement, and Victor's family members who stared at her with barely concealed hatred. Ms. Johnson, the prosecutor began, please tell the court how you first learned of the defendant's threats against your family. The questions were clinical, designed to establish facts rather than explore the emotional devastation of the past year. But as Alicia spoke, she found herself thinking about Marcus, who was back in Houston with his grandmother, finally meeting the woman who'd spent 8 years wondering about her grandson. The defendant made it clear that he viewed my son as leverage against Mr. Torres, she said, her voice steady despite the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. He showed photographs of Marcus at school, at the park, in our home. The message was unmistakable: comply, or my child would suffer the consequences. Victor sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed and showing no emotion, as if the destruction of multiple lives was merely an interesting legal exercise. But Alicia caught his eyes once during her testimony, and the cold calculation she saw there reminded her why they'd gone through this ordeal in the first place. Matthew's testimony came next, and Alicia watched him describe their history with clinical precision. The business relationships that had gone wrong, the evidence he'd gathered, the impossible choice between his family's safety and his legal obligations. But what the court couldn't capture was the way they'd learned to work together during those months of preparation. Late nights reviewing testimony, protecting Marcus from the media attention, slowly rebuilding trust that had been shattered 9 years ago. Mr. Torres, the defense attorney said during cross-examination, isn't it true that you abandoned Ms. Johnson and your unborn child for another woman? That your current concern for their safety is motivated more by guilt than genuine care? The question hit like a slap. Alicia watched Matthew's face, saw him struggle with the public airing of his worst choices, the way personal failings became legal strategies in the pursuit of justice. Yes, he said simply. I made terrible choices 9 years ago. I hurt the people I should have protected. But my past mistakes don't change the reality of Viktor Kozlov's threats against my family. The word family still felt strange, complicated, loaded with meanings they were still discovering. But in that courtroom, under oath and public scrutiny, it felt true in a way it hadn't for years. When the defense called Camille to testify, the courtroom tension ratcheted up another level. She looked different than she had in the warehouse, stronger, more composed, but also marked by whatever she'd endured since deciding to cooperate with law enforcement. Ms. Williams, the prosecutor asked, did the defendant approach you about your relationship with Mr. Torres and Ms. Johnson? Yes. He wanted me to help him locate them, to provide information about their lives, their routines, their vulnerabilities. Camille's voice was clear, but Alicia could see the cost of these revelations in her posture. And how did you respond? I refused. Despite the history between us, despite the mistakes I'd made, I couldn't be part of threatening a child. Some lines can't be crossed, no matter what the personal cost. Can someone who betrayed you become an ally when it matters most? Sometimes redemption comes in the form of choosing differently when faced with similar temptations. The prosecution's closing argument painted Victor as a predator who used fear and violence to build his empire, a man who saw families as tools to be manipulated and destroyed. The defense portrayed him as a businessman caught up in circumstances beyond his control, a victim of ambitious prosecutors and unreliable witnesses with their own agendas. But as Alicia listened to the competing narratives, she realized that the trial's outcome, while important, wasn't what would determine their family's future. That decision rested with 3 people who'd been damaged by betrayal and were slowly learning whether love could survive the weight of past mistakes. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, Victor's face showed no emotion, but Alicia felt something lift from her shoulders. Not complete freedom, but the possibility of it. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions they didn't answer. Cameras captured moments they hadn't consented to share. But in the chaos of justice served and media attention, Matthew found her hand and squeezed it gently. It's over, he said. This part is, she replied, looking toward a future that was uncertain, but finally, truly their own to shape. Marcus called that night from Houston, excited to tell them about his first day at a new school, about friends he'd made, about the normal 8-year-old concerns that had nothing to do with federal trials or family trauma. "When are you coming home, Mom?" he asked, and for the first time in months, Alicia knew exactly what to say. "Soon, baby. Very soon." 1 year later, they weren't the family they'd started as or the family they'd planned to be, but they were the family they'd chosen to become, and that made all the difference. The house in Houston suburbs was nothing like the luxury safe house or Matthew's Miami penthouse, but it had something those places never had: the sound of genuine laughter echoing through rooms where people chose to be rather than had to be. Alicia stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as Matthew taught Marcus to throw a football in the backyard they'd never had before. The sight still felt surreal sometimes. This life they were building together, brick by careful brick, conversation by honest conversation. "Higher, Dad," Marcus called out, his 9-year-old voice full of the confidence that came from having both parents present and accounted for. "Throw it higher, Dad." The word still made Matthew pause sometimes, still carry the weight of years lost and trust rebuilt. But Marcus used it easily now, naturally, like it had always been part of his vocabulary instead of something new and precious. The therapy had helped. Family counseling, individual sessions, group meetings where they learned to communicate without the defensive patterns that had destroyed them the first time. Dr. Martinez had warned them that healing wasn't linear, that there would be setbacks and difficult conversations and moments when the past felt heavier than the future. She'd been right about all of it. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Matthew asked, coming into the kitchen with grass stains on his jeans and sweat on his forehead. Evidence of the kind of normal father-son afternoon that had once seemed impossible. Tomorrow was their wedding day. Not a grand affair with hundreds of guests and elaborate ceremonies, but a small gathering in the backyard with Marcus, Alicia's mother, a few close friends, and the judge who'd overseen Victor's trial, a woman who'd become an unexpected friend during the months of legal proceedings. "Nervous," Alicia admitted, leaning into his embrace with the ease that had taken months to rebuild. "Good nervous, but nervous. Any regrets?" She considered the question seriously, the way she'd learned to consider all questions about their relationship. Honesty had become their foundation. Not brutal honesty that wounded, but gentle truth that built trust one conversation at a time. "I regret that it took us 10 years and almost losing everything to figure out how to love each other properly," she said. "But I don't regret where we ended up." Matthew's construction business was thriving in Houston now, built on a solid foundation of legitimate contracts and ethical practices. He'd left Miami and its complications behind, choosing a smaller but cleaner life that prioritized family over empire building. Alicia had taken a position at Texas Children's Hospital, working in pediatric emergency medicine, helping other families navigate their worst moments while appreciating the ordinary blessings of her own life. "Are you sure about the adoption?" Matthew asked, referring to the legal process that would make Marcus officially his son, not just biologically, but legally, permanently, without question. "Are you?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The doorbell rang, interrupting their quiet moment. Marcus raced through the house to answer it, his excitement bubbling over as their wedding cake was delivered. A simple 3-layer vanilla cake with chocolate frosting, nothing fancy, everything they needed. What does it mean to build a family the second time around? How do you create something new from the pieces of something broken? "Mom, Dad, come see," Marcus called from the living room, and they followed the sound of his voice to find him examining the cake with the serious expression he wore when something mattered deeply. "It's perfect," he announced. "Tomorrow's going to be the best day ever." Later that night, after Marcus had gone to bed and the house had settled into the peaceful quiet of home where everyone felt safe, Alicia and Matthew sat on their front porch swing, looking out at the suburban street that had become their sanctuary. "Do you think we would have made it if we tried to work things out 9 years ago?" she asked. Matthew considered the question, his thumb tracing circles on her hand in the absent way that had become habit. "No," he said finally. "We weren't ready then. We had to become different people first. Better people. People who understood what we were risking when we chose each other." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Perfect weather for new beginnings. As Alicia got ready for their wedding, she found herself thinking not about the fairy tale ending she'd once dreamed of, but about the real-life love story they'd fought to create.